Admiral Carter gave the order to advance, and thousands of human ships surged toward their ancestral homeworld. The alien defenders activated their weapon systems and demanded immediate surrender. But humanity had not journeyed this far, endured this much suffering, to give up now. The time for negotiation had passed long ago. The time for justice had finally arrived. Jake gripped the bridge railing tightly and watched as Earth grew larger on the main view screen. Somewhere beneath those alien cities and crystalline formations lay the bones of human civilization. The graves of defenders who had died fighting for their world waited for their people to come home at last. The exile was ending, but the real war was only just beginning. Lieutenant Commander Alex Turner stepped out of his stealth pod onto Earth's surface for the first time in his life. The air felt wrong against his skin, too thick, too charged with alien energy. The gravity was subtly different from what he'd experienced growing up in the fleet's artificial environments. Around him, his infiltration team moved like shadows through what had once been New York City. The structures towering above them bore no resemblance to the skyscrapers humans had built. These were massive organic constructions that pulsed with alien life, breathing and growing like living things. Vex's collective architecture had replaced concrete and steel with something that appeared to have grown from the earth rather than being constructed upon it. The streets were covered in a thick amber substance the insectoid aliens used instead of pavement, which gave slightly under their boots. Dr. Amy Rodriguez crouched beside a broken monument, carefully brushing away the alien growth covering it. Underneath the organic material, she discovered fragments of human writing, though most had been deliberately destroyed. The aliens hadn't been content merely to occupy human cities. They had worked systematically to erase every trace of human civilization from existence. Colonel Ben Harrison studied the tactical situation through advanced binoculars. Vex warriors moved through the streets in perfect formation, while their flying scouts patrolled overhead in synchronized patterns. The aliens had grown complacent during their 3,000 years of occupation, and their security was designed to keep other alien species out rather than prevent humans from infiltrating. Alex activated his cloaking device and moved deeper into the transformed city. The technology humanity had developed during exile rendered him invisible to alien sensors, and his footsteps made no sound on the strange amber streets. He passed groups of Vex workers tending to the organic buildings, and none detected his presence mere meters away. The team's mission was to gather intelligence about how the aliens had transformed Earth and identify weaknesses in their defenses. What they discovered was far worse than anyone had anticipated. The aliens hadn't simply conquered Earth. They had attempted to remake it entirely in their own image, erasing human history as though it had never existed. Dr. Rodriguez located the remains of the Metropolitan Museum buried beneath layers of Vex construction. She squeezed through a narrow gap in the organic walls and activated her light. Inside the ruined building, she discovered something that made her hands tremble with barely controlled rage. The aliens had converted part of the museum into a trophy room filled with human artifacts. Display cases held human weapons and tools labeled as examples of primitive, inferior technology. Holographic recreations depicted human soldiers fighting desperately against overwhelming alien forces during Earth's final battle. The presentations described humans as a violent, chaotic species that had been removed for the good of galactic civilization. Their genocide portrayed as a mercy to the galaxy. Alex reached the center of what had been Manhattan and found a colossal Vex hive structure built directly over the ruins of a United Nations building. The symbolism was deliberate and cruel. Where humanity had once strived to create peace between nations, the aliens had erected a monument to their own supposed superiority. Colonel Harrison moved through subway tunnels the aliens had converted into breeding chambers for their larvae. The walls pulsed with organic material, and the air was thick with the overwhelming stench of alien reproduction. He planted surveillance devices that would monitor Vex communications and movement patterns, gathering vital intelligence for the coming assault. The team discovered that each of the 3 alien species had claimed different regions of Earth as their territory. The Zephyrians had seized control of the western continents, covering them with crystal formations that created perfectly geometric patterns visible from space. The Vex Collective had claimed the eastern landmasses, transforming them into vast interconnected hive cities. The Luminari had converted the oceans into massive energy fields they used for sustenance and communication. Dr. Rodriguez made her way to what had been Washington, D.C., and found that the aliens had constructed a joint capital there. Representatives from all three species worked together in a massive complex combining crystal architecture, organic growth, and energy fields. The building stood on the exact spot where the White House had once welcomed leaders from around the world. Another deliberate insult to human memory. Alex infiltrated the alien archives and discovered extensive records of human resistance that had continued for decades after the main exodus. Small groups of humans had hidden in remote areas, waging guerrilla wars against the occupying forces. The aliens had methodically hunted them down, celebrating each victory as another step toward perfect galactic order. The intelligence reports revealed that the aliens hadn't merely wanted to remove humans from Earth. They had wanted to prove their way of life was superior to human chaos. They had meticulously documented everything they did to the planet as an example for other species who might resist triumvirate authority. Colonel Harrison found disturbing evidence that the aliens had conducted experiments on captured humans during the early years of occupation. They had tried to understand what made humans so unpredictable and, in their view, dangerously violent. The research had been abandoned when the last human prisoners died in captivity, but the records remained as a chilling testament to alien cruelty. The team's most critical discovery came when Alex located the ruins of NORAD buried deep beneath Zephyrian crystal formations. The mountain had been hollowed out and filled with alien technology, but the deepest levels had been sealed and forgotten over millennia. Using cutting tools that could slice through crystal like paper, Alex broke through to the original human installations. Inside the abandoned command center, Dr. Rodriguez found computer systems that had been running on emergency power for 3,000 years. The data cores contained detailed information about triumvirate weaknesses that human scientists had discovered during the war. Weapon specifications never used, tactical plans never implemented. Most importantly, they found records of a classified project called Operation Phoenix. The last human defenders had been developing a weapon capable of turning the planet itself against the alien occupiers. The project had remained incomplete when Earth fell, but all the research data was there, waiting for someone to finish what the heroes of the past had started. Alex transmitted the data to the fleet using quantum communication, methods the aliens couldn't detect or intercept. Admiral Carter's response came immediately, filled with grim satisfaction. The human exile was about to end, and the aliens who had stolen Earth were about to discover what 3,000 years of human ingenuity could accomplish when driven by unwavering determination. The infiltration team prepared to extract from the planet, but before they departed, Dr. Rodriguez placed a small device in the ruins of the Lincoln Memorial. The memorial itself had been destroyed, its foundation buried beneath alien construction. The device would broadcast a specific message on the day human forces returned to reclaim their world, a message of hope for the dead and warning for the living. As Alex's stealth pod lifted off from Earth's surface, he looked down at the alien cities covering his ancestral home. Soon those cities would be ruins, and the crystal formations would be melted slag. The time for reconnaissance was over. The time for revenge was about to begin. The human fleet moved into Earth's orbital space like a storm of metal and righteous fury. General Patricia Stone stood in the command center of her assault ship, watching as thousands of alien defense platforms powered up their weapon systems. The Triumvirate had constructed an impressive network of space stations and automated defenses around Earth, but they had made one catastrophic mistake in their planning. They had underestimated human adaptability. Chief Engineer Marcus Johnson activated the quantum disruption field from his position aboard the flagship. The technology was something humanity had developed after decades of studying the fundamental forces holding the universe together. The field spread outward from the human ships like an invisible wave of annihilation. When it reached the alien defenses, everything changed instantly. Zephyrian crystal weapons simply ceased functioning as their energy matrices collapsed. Vex organic defense platforms began shutting down as their biological systems failed catastrophically. Luminari energy weapons flickered and died as the field disrupted their coherence patterns. In less than 30 seconds, the most powerful defense network in the galaxy had become completely useless. Captain Diana Walsh piloted her stealth destroyer Silent Thunder through the disabled defense grid. Her ship could phase through solid matter. Using dimensional shift technology, the aliens couldn't detect or counter. She materialized inside enemy command stations, eliminated their crews with ruthless efficiency, then vanished like a ghost before reinforcements could respond. Admiral Carter's voice echoed across all communication channels as he broadcast his message to the planet below. He spoke in perfect Zephyrian, using their formal diplomatic language, telling them that humanity had learned much during their exile. He switched to the clicking sounds of Vex communication, explaining how human patience had been refined into something far more dangerous than mere violence. Finally, he used the harmonic frequencies Luminari beings understood, promising them that their greatest fears were about to become reality. The aliens on Earth sent frantic messages demanding to know how humanity had returned and how they had developed such devastatingly advanced technology. Admiral Carter's response was broadcast across the entire planet, so every alien could hear his words clearly. He told them that 3,000 years ago, they had called humans too violent for civilized space. They had claimed human unpredictability was a threat to galactic order. They had given humanity one choice: leave or be destroyed. Now humanity was offering them the same ultimatum, but unlike the aliens, humans would ensure their enemies understood the true meaning of that choice. General Stone launched the first wave of ground assaults, but her targets weren't military installations. Instead, her forces struck at the infrastructure that made Earth habitable for the alien species occupying it. Human sonic weapons shattered Zephyrian crystal networks, transforming their beautiful geometric cities into fields of deadly shrapnel that cut down anyone nearby. The crystalline structures the Zephyrians had valued above all else became instruments of their own destruction. The Vex Collective discovered that their organic cities were infected with quantum viruses humanity had specifically designed to attack their biological architecture. The hive structures began consuming themselves as the virus spread through their living walls like cancer. Vex drones frantically tried to stop the infection, but every attempt only accelerated its spread. Luminari energy beings found their atmospheric streams disrupted by quantum static generators that human ships deployed throughout the upper atmosphere. The energy fields they used for sustenance and communication began collapsing, forcing many Luminari back into physical form, where they became vulnerable to conventional weapons for the first time in their existence. Captain Walsh's Silent Thunder conducted surgical strikes against alien command centers across the planet. Her ship materialized inside heavily defended facilities, eliminated key leadership before they could coordinate any effective response, then vanished. The aliens had never encountered technology capable of bypassing their shields and armor so completely. It was like fighting ghosts that could kill but couldn't be killed. The Triumvirate leaders attempted to contact their colonies in other star systems, desperately calling for reinforcements and support. They discovered that humanity had been extraordinarily busy during their exile. Human strike forces had already neutralized Triumvirate outposts throughout this entire sector of the galaxy. Earth was completely isolated, cut off from any hope of reinforcement or rescue. Dr. Peter Knox monitored alien communications from his position aboard the intelligence vessel Nightfall. He had spent decades studying each species, understanding their psychology, and knew exactly how to inflict maximum psychological damage. The Zephyrians valued order and perfection above everything else. So human forces used captured crystal technology to create impossible structures that violated every principle of Zephyrian mathematics. The structures hurt to look at, causing physical pain that made Zephyrians recoil in horror from their own architectural principles being perverted. The Zephyrians had always believed their geometric perfection made them superior to chaotic species like humans. Knox activated the crystalline chaos generators that human engineers had built using reverse-engineered alien technology. The devices created impossible structures that violated every piece the Vex Collective depended on their hive mind for survival and decision-making. Knox deployed quantum noise generators that disrupted their psychic communications, driving many of them insane. Individual Vex who lost connection to the hive began attacking each other in confusion and terror, unable to function as isolated consciousnesses. The Luminari were beings of pure energy who feared entropy and dissolution more than anything else in existence. Human weapons demonstrated the ability to permanently extinguish their essence rather than just temporarily dispersing it. For the first time in their existence spanning millions of years, the Luminari experienced genuine, primal terror. Major Nicole Grant led specialized assault teams to reclaim sites of human historical significance. They fought desperate battles in the ruins of major cities, not for strategic military value, but to prove that humanity had returned to stay. Every victory was broadcast across the galaxy, showing other species that the humans who had been cleansed were now stronger than their oppressors had ever been. The battle for the ruins of London lasted 3 brutal days as human forces fought through layers of alien construction to reach the foundation stones of ancient buildings. When they finally planted the human flag where Parliament had once stood, the symbolism was unmistakable to everyone watching across the galaxy. Humanity was reclaiming its heritage one sacred piece at a time, and nothing would stop them. Admiral Christina Blake's heavy assault fleet began the systematic destruction of every piece of alien infrastructure on Earth. Massive industrial complexes that had processed raw materials of the Triumvirate were reduced to rubble by precise antimatter bombardments. Orbital elevators connecting the surface to space stations were severed and allowed to crash into alien cities below, adding to the chaos and destruction. The terraforming equipment aliens had used to reshape Earth according to their preferences was captured intact and reprogrammed by human technicians. The same machines were immediately put to work restoring the planet's original atmosphere and climate. Where crystal formations had replaced ancient forests, new trees were planted in soil purified of alien contamination. Triumvirate leaders made increasingly desperate attempts at negotiation as they realized their situation was utterly hopeless. They offered to share Earth equally with returning humans. They promised massive reparations for the exile, technology, resources, entire star systems. They begged for mercy. Admiral Carter's response was broadcast to every corner of the galaxy so no species would misunderstand humanity's position. He told them that 3,000 years ago, humans had tried diplomacy and offered to coexist peacefully. The alien response had been genocide and complete displacement from everything humans call home. Now the aliens would experience exactly what they had given to humanity, but with one crucial difference. Humans had learned from their exile. They had learned to be thorough. They had learned patience. And most importantly, they had learned that mercy shown to enemies who showed you none was not virtue. It was foolishness. The 3 triumvirate leaders stood in the ruins of their joint capital, staring at screens showing their forces collapsing across Earth. High crystalline Zexadh Thera, the Zephyrians watched their perfect crystal cities crumble into chaotic fragments, each collapse a violation of everything she believed made existence meaningful. High Mother Keknith of the Vex Collective felt her connection to millions of drones being severed one by one, each loss like having part of her mind ripped away. The sensation of isolation was driving her toward madness. Energy Prime Luminareth of the Luminari witnessed his people being forced into physical forms and scattered like leaves in a storm, their coherence shattered, their immortality stripped away. Admiral Christina Blake commanded the heavy assault fleet moving through Earth's atmosphere like avenging angels wrapped in fire and steel. Her ships carried weapons that turned alien strongholds into glass, and her crews showed no mercy to the occupiers who had stolen their world. Every blast from her cannons was justice for 3,000 years of exile. Every destroyed alien facility was retribution for the billions who had died homeless among the stars. Dr. Peter Knox sat in his laboratory aboard the research vessel and allowed himself a cold smile as he watched the psychological profiles of the alien leaders deteriorating in real time. He had spent decades studying their species and knew exactly what would break their spirits completely. The fear in their communications was growing exponentially with each passing hour as they realized humans weren't just reclaiming Earth. They were doing it with a precision and thoroughness that absolutely terrified them. Principle of Zephyrian mathematics, causing physical pain to anyone who looked at them. Zephyrians began destroying their own constructions to escape the agony of perceiving them. Major Nicole Grant led her special forces through the ruins of Washington, D.C., toward the alien Capitol building. Her soldiers moved like shadows through the twisted architecture, eliminating every defender they encountered with practiced efficiency. The aliens had built their seat of power on the exact location where human democracy had once flourished, and Grant intended to reclaim every single inch of that sacred ground. The Vex Collective had ruled to the power of their hive mind for millions of years. They had never experienced the terror of being alone in their own thoughts, isolated from their shared consciousness. Knox's quantum noise generators filled their psychic channels with static that drove individual Vex completely insane. Drones began attacking their own hive mates as their shared consciousness dissolved into chaos and madness. Captain Diana Walsh materialized inside the Zephyrian Command Center, using her phase shift technology, appearing like a demon from their worst nightmares. The alien commanders frantically tried to activate their security systems, but every piece of their equipment had been neutralized by human quantum fields. Walsh eliminated them with weapons that turned their crystalline bodies into dust, then vanished before reinforcements could arrive, a ghost delivering death. The Luminari had existed as pure energy for so long they had forgotten what it meant to be vulnerable, to feel pain, to fear death. Nox's entropy weapons forced them back into solid matter, where they experienced agony and terror for the first time in millions of years. Many of them simply shut down from the psychological shock of having physical bodies again, while others begged desperately for death rather than continue existing in such a limited, painful form. Admiral Blake's bombardment reached the industrial sectors the aliens had built to strip mine Earth's resources for export across their empire. Massive factories that had processed raw materials for triumvirate worlds were reduced to smoking craters. The dark void at the edge of the solar system suddenly erupted with brilliant light as thousands of ships materialized from the emptiness of space. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the New Horizon and watched as his fleet emerged around him in perfect formation. 3,000 years of wandering through the cosmos had finally come to an end. They were home at last. Jake pressed his palm against the cold metal bulkhead of his ship, feeling the deep vibrations of the massive engines thrumming through the hull. Behind him stood Dr. Lisa Chun, her eyes locked on the streams of data cascading across her console. The readings told them everything they needed to know about their ancient homeworld. Earth was still there, spinning in the darkness, but it no longer belonged to them. Admiral Ryan Carter's voice crackled through the communication system from his flagship, each word carrying the weight of 3 millennia of careful planning and preparation. The fleet had evolved during their exile from a desperate band of survivors into a military force capable of challenging entire civilizations. Every ship bristled with weapons the galaxy had never encountered before, and every human aboard burned with a bitter memory of what they had lost. Dr. Chin looked up from her readings, her expression grim. The planet below them showed signs of catastrophic transformation, where verdant continents had once stretched across the surface. Strange crystalline formations now glittered in the sunlight. Bizarre organic structures resembling colossal insects had replaced the cities humans had built over millennia of civilization. The atmosphere itself pulsed with alien energy that made the sky glow with unnatural, shifting colors. Commander Sophie Williams entered the bridge with purposeful strides. Her uniform was immaculately pressed, her face an emotionless mask, but Jake could see the fire burning in her eyes. She had been born aboard the fleet during the long exile and had never set foot on Earth, yet she knew every story about what it had once been. The anger driving her forward was not born of personal memory, but of inherited rage, passed down through countless generations who had died homeless among the stars. The fleet moved deeper into the solar system, and Jake found himself remembering the stories his grandfather had told him as a child. The Triumvirate Coalition had come to Earth with arrogant proclamations that humans were too violent for civilized space. The crystalline Zephyrians, with their perfect geometric cities, had looked down upon human chaos with contempt. The insectoid Vex Collective, with their unified hive mind mentality, had called human individuality a dangerous disease. The energy beings known as the Luminari had declared human emotions to be primitive and barbaric. They had given humanity one ultimatum: leave Earth forever or face total annihilation. The human governments had desperately tried to negotiate, offering to share the planet or fundamentally change their society. But the aliens had refused every proposal. They wanted humanity completely erased from Earth, and they possessed the technology to make it happen. Billions of humans had perished in the devastating conflict that followed, but enough had escaped into the void to ensure the species survived. Jake watched the tactical displays as his ships spread throughout the outer planets in strategic formations. They encountered their first triumvirate patrol near Jupiter, and the alien vessels immediately issued a challenge. The patrol leader's transmission was saturated with shock and disbelief. They had assumed humanity was either extinct or scattered so far across the galaxy that they would never dare return. Dr. Chen activated the gravity manipulation systems that humanity had perfected during their long exile. The alien ships suddenly found themselves trapped in fields that twisted the very fabric of space around them. Their hulls buckled and cracked under forces their shields were never designed to withstand. The human ships hadn't fired a single weapon, yet the patrol vessels were rendered completely helpless, drifting dead in space. The surviving aliens broadcast desperate warnings to Earth, but their communications were immediately severed by quantum interference fields. Jake smiled coldly as he watched the alien ships drift powerless through the void. They would be permitted to live just long enough to deliver a message, nothing more. Admiral Carter's broadcast began transmitting on all frequencies and in every major galactic language. His voice was calm and measured, but every syllable carried an unmistakable promise of what was coming. He told the aliens occupying Earth that humanity remembered everything that had been done to them. He spoke of the billions who had died during the Exodus and the countless children who had been born homeless among the stars, never knowing the touch of real soil beneath their feet. The fleet continued its inexorable advance toward Earth, and more alien ships attempted to intercept them. Each encounter ended identically, human technology proving vastly superior to anything the Triumvirate possessed. Weapons that had seemed unstoppable 3,000 years ago now appeared primitive compared to what humanity had developed. The exiles had used their time wisely, learning from every species they encountered across the galaxy. Commander Williams reported that the advanced scout teams were ready for deployment. These were elite special forces trained in infiltration and reconnaissance, prepared to gather critical intelligence about Earth's current state. They carried equipment that rendered them invisible to alien sensors, and weapons capable of killing without detection. Jake thought about his ancestors who had lived on Earth before the exile, who had breathed natural air and felt authentic soil under their feet. They had watched sunsets unfiltered by alien energy fields and seen stars unobscured by crystalline constructions. Everything that made Earth a home had been stripped away and replaced according to alien preferences. Dr. Chen's research teams had spent decades meticulously studying the three species that had driven them out. They knew exactly how each alien race thought, what they valued, and most importantly, what they feared. The Zephyrians valued order and perfection above all else. The Vex collective depended entirely on their hive-mind connection for survival. The Luminari existed as pure energy and feared anything that could disrupt their coherence. Human scientists had developed specialized weapons targeting each species' fundamental weaknesses. Sonic devices capable of shattering Zephyrian crystal structures into deadly fragments. Quantum viruses designed to sever Vex hive connections, driving individual drones insane. Energy dampeners that could force Luminari beings back into physical form, where they became vulnerable conventional weapons. As the fleet approached Earth's orbital space, Jake could see the massive alien defense network surrounding the planet. Enormous space stations bristled with advanced weapons, and automated defense platforms patrolled in flawless formations. The aliens had transformed Earth into a fortress, but they had designed their defenses to repel conventional attacks. They had no concept of what was coming. Grant's forces fought their way through the alien Capitol building floor by floor, level by level. Each was defended by the best soldiers the Triumvirate could muster, their elite troops making desperate stands. But human weapons and tactics proved superior at every turn. The aliens had grown soft during 3,000 years of unchallenged rule, while humans had been forged into something harder than diamond by their exile. The Triumvirate leaders made one final, desperate attempt at diplomacy. They sent a transmission directly to Admiral Carter, offering complete and unconditional surrender. They promised to evacuate Earth immediately and leave all their technology behind. They spoke of sharing the galaxy peacefully and learning to coexist with humanity as equals. Their words were broadcast across all channels so every human could hear them, a public plea for mercy. Carter's response echoed through the ships of the human fleet and across the surface of Earth. He reminded the aliens that 3,000 years ago, humans had made similar offers of peace and cooperation. They had proposed sharing Earth, living together, learning from each other. The alien response had been to declare humanity too violent for civilized space and drive them from their homeworld at gunpoint. killing billions in the process. The time for mercy had been 3,000 years ago. That time had passed. Knox watched the alien communication networks collapse as panic spread through their remaining forces like wildfire. The psychological warfare was working exactly as he had planned, perhaps even better. The Zephyrians were abandoning their geometric principles entirely, building random structures in their desperation. The Vex collective was fragmenting into individual units that fought each other instead of the humans. The Luminari were expending their energy reserves trying to maintain coherence, and many were burning out permanently. Blake's ships began the final phase of the assault, targeting the massive terraforming equipment the aliens had used to reshape Earth to their preferences. The machines that had poisoned the atmosphere and altered the climate were destroyed with surgical precision. Human technicians immediately began deploying their own advanced terraforming technology to restore the planet to its original state. Grant reached the top floor of the alien capital and found the three leaders huddled together in their command center like frightened children. They had activated every defense system they possessed, pouring all their remaining power into shields and weapons. It made no difference. Human technology rendered their defenses completely useless. The beings who had once commanded the most powerful military force in the galaxy now cowered before soldiers from the species they had tried to exterminate. The irony was not lost on anyone present. Major Grant placed the three leaders under arrest and began transmitting their surrender to every corner of the galaxy. The message was clear to all species who might be watching. The Triumvirate Coalition that had ruled through fear and superior technology for thousands of years had been utterly defeated by the humans they had underestimated. The aliens had called humanity too violent and unpredictable for civilized space. They had claimed human chaos was a threat to galactic order. Now they learned what real violence looked like when it was refined by 3 millennia of patient planning and focused by an unquenchable thirst for justice. Earth belonged to humanity once again, but the cost of the alien occupation would never be forgotten. The graves of the resistance fighters who had died defending their world were finally avenged. The children who had been born in exile among the stars could now come home to the planet their ancestors had built. 3 months after the final battle, President Ellen Roberts stood on the steps of the rebuilt White House and looked out at the thousands of humans who had gathered to witness the restoration ceremony. The alien structures that had covered Washington, D.C. were gone, and in their place stood buildings that honor both the past and the future of humanity. The sky above was clear blue for the first time in 3,000 years, unpolluted by alien energy or chemical contamination. Dr. Kevin Walsh supervised the terraforming teams working around the clock to restore Earth's original ecosystem. The poison atmosphere was being cleaned by machines humanity had perfected during their long exile. The crystal formations that had covered entire continents were melted down, their materials repurposed to build monuments honoring human resilience and determination. General Samuel Cross walked to the halls of the new Galactic Defense Force headquarters, where human officers planned an expansion that would ensure no species would ever again threaten humanity's existence. Maps covered the walls, showing star systems where human colonies would be established and trade routes that would be protected by the most advanced fleet the galaxy had ever seen. The trial of the 3 alien leaders had become a spectacle broadcast to every corner of known space. Admiral Carter served as chief prosecutor, and his opening statement reminded the galaxy exactly why the Triumvirate had fallen. He presented overwhelming evidence of the systematic destruction of human civilization and the genocide of billions of innocent people who had only wanted to live in peace on their home world. High Crystalline XH Thera sat in the defendant's dock and listened as Carter described in meticulous detail how her people had shattered human monuments and replaced them with geometric patterns that served no purpose except to erase human history. Her perfect crystalline form showed cracks that had appeared during the psychological warfare, and her once bright energy patterns flickered with fear and despair. Hive Mother Keknith no longer commanded millions of drones through her psychic network. The quantum interference had permanently damaged her connection to collective, and she existed now as a single, isolated consciousness. For a being that had never known loneliness in millions of years of existence, the punishment was worse than death. Her compound eyes wept fluids her species had no name for, the physical manifestation of an emotion she had never experienced before. Energy Prime Luminareth remained trapped in physical form, unable to return to his natural energy state. The entropy weapons had fundamentally altered his molecular structure at a quantum level, and he was forced to experience existence through crude biological senses. Every moment of physical sensation was agony for a being that had once existed as pure thought and energy, transcendent and immortal. Dr. Walsh's teams completed the restoration of Central Park, where human children now played under trees that had been replanted in soil purified of all alien contamination. The laughter of the young echoed through air that smelled of earth and flowers rather than alien chemicals. Schools were built where human history would be taught to generations who would never know the shame of exile, never understand what it meant to be homeless among the stars. The alien leaders attempted to justify their actions during the trial, claiming that humans have been too violent and unpredictable to coexist with civilized species. They spoke of the chaos that human individuality brought to galactic order and the danger that human emotions posed to peaceful development. Their words fell on deaf ears as evidence of their own cruelty was displayed for all to see. The destroyed monuments, the trophy rooms, the experimental facilities where captured humans had been tortured. Carter's response became legendary throughout the galaxy, quoted by historians for centuries afterward. He told the defendants that they had been right about human violence. Humans were indeed dangerous when threatened, but they had catastrophically failed to understand the true nature of that danger. Humans were infinitely more dangerous when they had 3,000 years to plan and prepare their response. President Roberts delivered her inaugural address from the same spot where human leaders had once tried desperately to negotiate with the triumvirate. She declared that the age of human weakness was over and that Earth would become the center of a new galactic order, one based on justice rather than oppression. Her words were broadcast to every human colony and every alien world, so none could misunderstand humanity's intentions. The 3 alien leaders were sentenced to life imprisonment in specially designed facilities where they would be forced to watch as humanity expanded across the galaxy. They would see human ships arriving at their former homeworlds, carrying the same message of displacement that they had once brought to Earth. They would witness the establishment of human colonies on worlds that had been theirs for millions of years. They would live long enough to see everything they had built become human territory. General Cross established military academies where human officers learned the tactics that had defeated the triumvirate. The lessons were simple but devastatingly effective. Superior technology meant nothing without the will to use it properly and the wisdom to prepare thoroughly. Human ships now patrolled trade routes throughout the sector, enforcing laws that protected smaller species from the kind of oppression humanity had suffered. Dr. Walsh stood in the restored Arlington National Cemetery, where memorials honored not only the soldiers who had died in Earth's final battle, but also the billions who had perished during the long exile. The eternal flame burned for all those who had dreamed of returning home, but had died among the stars without ever feeling Earth's soil beneath their feet again. Their sacrifice had not been forgotten, and their children had finally come back to claim their inheritance. Admiral Carter walked to the halls of the United Nations building that had been rebuilt exactly as it had stood 3,000 years before, a perfect recreation down to the smallest detail. Representatives from dozens of species now came to Earth to seek audience with humanity and request protection from threats their own forces couldn't handle. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted permanently and irrevocably. The children who played in Earth's restored parks would grow up knowing their species commanded respect throughout the galaxy. They would serve on ships that explored new worlds and established colonies spreading human influence to the furthest reaches of space. They would never know the fear their ancestors had lived with or the shame of being driven from their home. They would inherit a galaxy where humanity's word was law. The galaxy had learned a lesson that would not be forgotten for 1,000 generations. Humanity had returned after 3,000 years of exile and proven that some wounds never heal. Some debts are never forgiven, and some species should never be underestimated. The species that had once called humans too violent for civilized space now lived under protection of human fleets and followed laws written by human hands. Earth was home once again, and humanity's long journey through the darkness was finally over. The age of human dominance had begun, and the stars themselves bore witness to the truth carved into the monuments of the new world. Humanity had kept its promise. They had come home to stay, and they would never be driven out again. 5 years after the reclamation, Earth had transformed once more. Captain Jake Morrison, now promoted to Fleet Admiral, stood in his office overlooking what had once been the ruins of Geneva. The city sprawled below him, rebuilt with architecture that honored the old world while incorporating the advanced technology humanity had gained during exile. Glass and steel towers reached toward the sky, but their designs echoed the classical European buildings that had stood here millennia ago. Dr. Lisa Chun entered his office, carrying a data pad filled with reports from across human-controlled space. She had aged gracefully over the years, though the weight of their victory still showed in her eyes. The restoration of Earth had been only the beginning of humanity's transformation of the galaxy. The expansion is proceeding ahead of schedule, she reported, pulling up holographic displays that showed human colonies spreading across dozens of star systems. We've established permanent settlements on 17 former triumvirate worlds. The local populations have been cooperative. Jake nodded, understanding the unspoken meaning behind her words. The aliens who had once ruled those worlds now lived as minorities under human governance, subject to laws they had no voice in creating. It was poetic justice, though Jake sometimes wondered if they had become what they had once hated. Commander Sophie Williams, now a full admiral herself, had taken command of the Frontier Fleet. Her ships patrolled the borders of human space, ensuring that no hostile force would ever again threaten humanity's dominion. She had earned a reputation throughout the galaxy as utterly ruthless with enemies, but fair with those who submitted to human authority. The Galactic Council had been dissolved and replaced with a Human Administrative Collective, though the acronym HAC was deliberately chosen to remind other species of humanity's relentless efficiency. Ambassador Marcus Thompson represented Earth at the diplomatic headquarters on Mars, where representatives from 73 different species came to petition for trade agreements, defense pacts, or simply to avoid human displeasure. Thompson was a master of the political game humanity now played. He had learned from the mistakes of the old United Nations, learned that mercy without strength was weakness, and that peace without the will to enforce it was merely a prelude to war. Under his guidance, humanity had established a new galactic order where human interests came first, always and without exception. The former triumvirate species faced very different fates under the new order. The Zephyrians, with their crystalline forms and obsession with geometric perfection, found themselves employed as architects and engineers under human supervision. Their cities on their homeworld of Crystallis Prime had been partially dismantled, the crystal formations harvested for materials. Human colonists now live alongside the surviving Zephyrians, a constant reminder of who ruled. High crystalline Zexit Thera remained in her cell, forced to watch holographic feeds of her people adapting to human rule. Some Zephyrians resisted, clinging to their old ways, and were relocated to designated preserves where they could maintain their traditional lifestyle, under constant surveillance. Others embraced the new reality, learning to work with humans and adopting aspects of human culture. These collaborators were rewarded with better living conditions and limited autonomy. The Vex Collective faced an even harsher reality. Their hive mind structure made them inherently dangerous to human authority. Dr. Peter Knox had developed quantum suppressors that could be implanted in Vex drones, limiting their psychic range and preventing the formation of large collective consciousness. The Vex now existed as small, isolated groups, families rather than the massive hives that had once dominated entire worlds. Hive mother Keknith lived in solitary confinement, her connection to her species severed permanently. Human scientists studied her neural patterns, learning how to better control and manage Vex populations. Some called it cruel, Knox called it necessary. The Vex had shown humanity no mercy. They would receive only what was required to maintain order. The Luminari suffered perhaps the most profound transformation. Energy Prime Luminareth and thousands of his kind remained trapped in physical form, imprisoned in specially designed facilities where dampening fields prevented them from returning to their natural state. Human researchers had discovered that Luminari in physical form could be integrated into advanced energy systems, their consciousness used to regulate power grids and shield generators. The ethics of this practice sparked heated debates in human councils. Some argued it was slavery, pure and simple, using sentient beings as components in machines. Others countered that the Luminari had attempted to exterminate humanity entirely and deserved whatever fate humans chose for them. President Roberts had ruled that Luminari cooperation would be rewarded with eventual release, while those who resisted would remain imprisoned indefinitely. Jake often visited the memorial gardens that now cover the sites of humanity's greatest losses during the Exodus. The Garden of Tears, built where Sydney had once stood, contained 3 billion names carved in black stone, one for each human who had died during the Exodus or the years of wandering. Visitors walked through in silence, many weeping as they found the names of ancestors they had never known. Dr. Chen's research team continued their work, but now focused on ensuring humanity's technological supremacy would never be challenged. They studied captured triumvirate technology, reverse engineered it, and improved upon it. New weapons, new ships, new ways to project power across vast distances. Humanity's arsenal grew with each passing year. The most controversial development was the Genesis Protocol, a terraforming system that could transform any planet into an Earth-like environment in a matter of decades. The protocol was devastatingly efficient, but it eradicated all existing ecosystems in the process. When human surveyors discovered inhabited worlds that humanity desired for colonization, difficult decisions had to be made. Admiral Williams led the first Genesis Protocol deployment on a world called Redania, home to a primitive species of plant-based sentience. The aliens had no space travel, no advanced technology, and posed no threat to humanity. But Redania was perfectly positioned along a strategic trade route, and its climate made it ideal for human colonization. The debate in the Human Council lasted for weeks. Some argued that destroying Redania's native species would make humanity no better than the triumvirate. Others insisted that human security and prosperity took precedence over the survival of primitive aliens who couldn't defend their own world. In the end, the decision was made to proceed, with the caveat that specimens of the Verdanian species would be preserved in genetic archives. Admiral Williams had carried out her orders, but the look in her eyes when she returned haunted Jake for months. She had been born during the exile, raised on stories of human suffering and the righteousness of their cause. Now she had presided over the extinction of an innocent species, all for human convenience. The victory suddenly felt less pure. Captain Diana Walsh continued her work with the Shadow Fleet, humanity's covert operations force. Her missions were never officially acknowledged, but everyone knew the Silent Thunder and ships like it were responsible for maintaining human dominance through fear and surgical violence. When species stepped out of line, the Shadow Fleet reminded them of the consequences. Walsh had aged into a cold, efficient instrument of human policy. She felt no joy in her work, but she never questioned its necessity. The galaxy was a brutal place, she reasoned, and humans had learned that lesson the hardest way possible. Better to be the hammer than the anvil. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had become the director of the Historical Preservation Society, dedicated to recovering and protecting human artifacts from the lost 3,000 years. Her teams excavated ruins across Earth, finding pieces of civilization that had been systematically destroyed. Museums filled with recovered treasures, each artifact a connection to the past that had been stolen. Rodriguez also oversaw the education system that ensured every human child learned the truth of the exile. The curriculum was carefully designed to instill both pride in humanity's resilience and wariness of alien species. Some criticized it as propaganda, teaching children to hate. Rodriguez countered that it was teaching them to remember, to never again be so naive as to trust in the goodness of others without the strength to defend themselves. Colonel Ben Harrison retired from active service and became a teacher at the New Earth Military Academy. His classes on insurgency and guerrilla warfare were mandatory for all officer candidates. He taught them that humans had survived not through superior numbers or technology, but through adaptability and absolute determination. He taught them that victory belonged to whoever was willing to sacrifice more, endure more, suffer more. Harrison's students went on to command humanity's expanding fleets, carrying his lessons with them to the far reaches of space. They established military bases on hundreds of worlds, always ready to respond to any threat. The galaxy learned that challenging human authority meant facing a force that would not stop, would not compromise, and would not show mercy. Major Nicole Grant led the Reclamation Corps, military units tasked with occupying and administering former triumvirate territories. Her forces maintained order through a combination of overwhelming military presence and carefully calculated rewards for cooperation. Grant had developed a reputation for being firm but fair. Aliens who submitted to human rule and followed the laws found their lives improved in many ways. Those who resisted faced swift and severe consequences. Grant often reflected on the irony of her position. She was essentially doing to the triumvirate species what they had done to humanity, displacing them, subjugating them, forcing them to live under foreign rule. But she reminded herself that humanity had tried peace first. The aliens had chosen war. Now they lived with the consequences of that choice. The prison facility holding the three triumvirate leaders had become a bizarre tourist attraction. Humans could pay to view the former rulers through observation windows, watching them in their cells. Some visitors spat at the glass or shouted insults. Others simply stared in silence, tried to understand how these beings could have caused so much suffering. Zexaethera spent her days attempting to create geometric patterns with limited materials, her crystalline form growing duller with each passing year. Keknit existed in a state of perpetual mental anguish, her mind crying out for the hive connection that would never come again. Luminareth remained trapped in physical form, his consciousness slowly degrading as he struggled against the fundamental wrongness of corporeal existence. Some human rights advocates argued for better treatment of the prisoners, citing human ethical standards. Others organized protests demanding their execution. President Roberts had decided on perpetual imprisonment, declaring that death would be too merciful. The three leaders would live long lives, witnesses to everything they had lost. Ambassador Thompson faced increasing pressure from the galactic community to moderate human expansion and enforcement policies. Dozens of species had lodged formal complaints about human actions, displaced populations, harsh governance, economic exploitation. Thompson listened politely to each complaint, then reminded the complainants that humanity had the strongest military force in the galaxy and could do as it pleased. But privately, Thompson worried. He saw humanity becoming the very thing it had fought against. The compassion and idealism that had once defined human culture was eroding, replaced by pragmatic brutality. Young humans now spoke casually about the inferiority of alien species, about humanity's right to rule. The lessons of the exile had been learned too well. Jake shared Thompson's concerns. Late at night, when he couldn't sleep, he would walk through the empty corridors of Fleet Command and wonder what his grandfather would think of what humanity had become. They had survived, yes. They had reclaimed their home and established dominance across the stars. But had they lost something essential in the process? Dr. Chen found him during one such walk, her own insomnia bringing her to the same quiet corridors. They stood together looking out at Earth through the massive windows, the planet beautiful and restored below them. Do you ever wonder if we went too far? Jake asked quietly. Chen was silent for a long moment. Every day, she finally admitted. But then I remember what they did to us. I remember the billions who died, the children born in exile, the 3,000 years of wandering. And I think maybe we didn't go far enough. That's what scares me, Jake said, that we become so consumed by vengeance that we can't remember what we're supposed to be protecting. We survived because we valued life, creativity, individuality. Now we're crushing those same values in other species. They would have done worse to us, Chen replied. They tried to do worse to us. Does that make it right? Chen had no answer to that question. Neither did Jake. But they both knew that humanity had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The galaxy would remember them as conquerors, as the species that had risen from the ashes to dominate all others. Whether they would be remembered as just conquerors or as tyrants would be for future generations to decide. As dawn broke over Geneva, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jake Morrison looked out at the world humanity had reclaimed and the empire they had built. They had come home. But the price of that homecoming echoed across the stars, a warning to any who might threaten humanity, and a question that would haunt them for generations to come. In saving themselves, had they lost their souls?